The leather-bound diary was discovered beneath the rotting floorboards of the abandoned Whitmore homestead on a gray November morning in 1840, nearly a year after the entire family had been found dead under circumstances that defied every attempt at rational explanation. What made the discovery particularly chilling was not just the diary's contents, but the fact that the final entry had been written in Luther Whitmore's distinctive hand on the very day he died, except the words described his own death in precise detail, down to the exact time and manner, as if he had witnessed his own demise before it occurred. The township of Hedgewood sat nestled in the rolling hills of western Pennsylvania, where the last remnants of wilderness gave way to scattered farms and modest settlements. It was a place where folks minded their own business and trusted in the Lord's providence. But even the most God-fearing residents couldn't shake the feeling that something unholy had taken root in the Whitmore place during that terrible autumn of 1839. Deputy Marshal Josiah Brennan had been the one to discover the diary while conducting a final search of the property before it was to be sold at public auction. The Whitmore family, Luther, his wife Agnes, and their 3 children, had been found dead in their beds on October 13, 1839, with no signs of violence or disease, their faces bearing expressions of absolute terror that had haunted Brennan's dreams for months. Have you ever found an old diary or journal that seemed to know things it shouldn't? Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. We'd love to hear about any encounters you've had with objects that seem to possess knowledge beyond what should be possible. Has anyone you know ever experienced something that predicted future events in ways that couldn't be explained? The diary's first entry was dated June 15, 1839, written in Luther Whitmore's familiar handwriting, but the words it contained were unlike anything the God-fearing farmer had ever been known to speak or write. The entry began with what appeared to be a normal account of daily farm work, but gradually descended into descriptions of visions and supernatural encounters that challenged everything known about the quiet, devout family man. The voices came again last night, the first entry read. They speak through the walls of this house, through the very timbers and stones, telling me things that haven't happened yet but will come to pass as surely as the sun rises. They showed me Agnes's death, how she'll clutch at her throat and gasp for air that won't come, her eyes wide with terror at what she sees approaching from the corner of our bedroom. The date will be October 13th at 17 minutes past midnight. I know this because I watched it happen in the vision they gave me. Deputy Brennan had initially dismissed the entry as the product of a mind affected by isolation or religious mania. But as he continued reading through the diary's pages, he discovered that every prediction it contained had come to pass with terrifying accuracy. Weather patterns, crop failures, the death of livestock, even the exact words spoken by neighbors during casual conversations, all of it had been recorded in Luther's hand days or weeks before the events actually occurred. But it was the entries describing the deaths of his own family members that transformed Brennan's skepticism into cold, creeping horror. Each death was described in meticulous detail, from the expressions on their faces to their final words, from the exact positions of their bodies to the temperature of their skin when they would be found. The diary didn't just predict these deaths, it reveled in them, describing the family's terror and suffering with a clinical detachment that seemed utterly foreign to the loving father and husband Luther had been known to be. Little Emma will be the second to go, read an entry dated July 4, 1839. She'll wake screaming about the gray lady who stands at the foot of her bed, pointing with a finger that stretches longer and longer until it touches the child's heart. The scream will stop abruptly at 3:47 in the morning on September 23rd, and when we light the lamps we'll find her with that same gray finger mark burned into her nightgown, right over her heart. But she won't be dead yet, not for another 6 minutes. She'll spend those minutes telling us about the place where the gray lady is taking her, a place where children work in mines that never see sunlight, digging up the bones of people who haven't died yet. Brennan checked the records kept by the township's minister. Emma Whitmore had indeed died on September 23, 1839, at exactly the time specified in the diary. The child's nightgown had been found with a peculiar burn mark over her heart, and according to her parents' testimony, she had spent her final moments describing visions of underground caverns filled with the bones of the living. As Brennan continued reading, he began to understand that the diary was not simply recording Luther Whitmore's visions, it was somehow compelling them to come true. Each entry read like a script that reality was bound to follow, as if the very act of writing these terrible predictions gave them the power to reshape the world according to their dark prophecies. The entry describing the death of young Daniel Whitmore was particularly disturbing, not just for its detailed account of the boy's final moments, but for the way it seemed to anticipate the reader's horror and feed upon it. Daniel will die on October 1st at sunset, the diary recorded. He'll be playing in the barn when he hears his name being called from the hayloft. But when he climbs up to look, he'll find not a person but a hole in the floor that wasn't there before. A hole that goes down deeper than the barn's foundation, deeper than the root cellar, deeper than any hole should go. The voice will still be calling from somewhere far below, sounding more and more like Daniel himself, until he realizes that what he's hearing is his own voice calling up from the bottom of that impossible pit. He'll lean over to look, and that's when he'll understand that the hole is calling him home. The boy's death had occurred exactly as described. Daniel Whitmore was found at the bottom of a deep pit in the barn's hayloft, though no one could explain how such a hole had appeared overnight in what had been solid wooden flooring. The strangest aspect of the discovery was that the hole seemed to have sealed itself after claiming its victim. By the time neighbors arrived to help search for the missing boy, there was no sign that the floor had ever been disturbed. Brennan found himself unable to stop reading the diary, despite the growing dread that settled over him with each page. The entries seemed to reach out from the yellowed paper and wrap themselves around his thoughts, making it impossible to focus on anything else. He began to understand why the diary had remained hidden beneath the floorboards for so long. It was the sort of object that demanded to be read, that called to anyone who came near it with promises of forbidden knowledge and terrible truths. The prediction of Agnes Whitmore's death was the most elaborate and disturbing entry in the entire diary, spanning several pages and describing not just the moment of her passing, but the supernatural forces that would bring it about. According to the diary, Agnes would begin seeing her deceased children in the days leading up to her own death, but they would not be the loving spirits a mother might hope to encounter. Instead, they would be changed by whatever realm had claimed them, transformed into creatures that retained their children's faces but possessed hungers and needs that belonged to something far more ancient and malevolent. Agnes will wake on the night of October 12th to find Emma and Daniel standing at the foot of our bed, the diary recorded. But their eyes will be holes filled with gray light, and when they speak, it will be with voices like wind through broken glass. They'll tell their mother that the gray lady needs more children for her mines, that the work is hard and the bones are heavy, and that living children work so much better than dead ones. They'll explain that the gray lady has been watching our family for generations, waiting for the right combination of bloodline and circumstance to open the pathway between her realm and ours. Emma will reach out with fingers that stretch like shadows, and Daniel will smile with teeth that reflect images of caverns filled with the sound of children weeping. Agnes will try to scream, but no sound will emerge because the gray lady will already have her hand around my wife's throat, squeezing tighter and tighter until Agnes understands that her death is just the beginning of our family's true purpose. The final entry in the diary was dated October 13, 1839, the very day the Whitmore family was found dead. But this entry was different from all the others, written in a handwriting that was recognizably Luther's but somehow altered, as if his hand had been guided by something else while forming the words. The entry described not just Luther's own impending death but the supernatural transaction that would complete the Gray Lady's harvest of the Whitmore bloodline. Today I die, but not as other men die, the final entry began. The Gray Lady has shown me the truth about our family's history, about the generations of Whitmores who have served her needs in realms that exist beneath and between the world of the living. We are not merely her victims, We are her chosen instruments, selected for our ability to cross between worlds and gather what she requires for her eternal work. My death will appear natural to those who find us, but it will actually be a transformation, a passing from this realm to hers, where Agnes and the children are already waiting to begin their new existence. The entry went on to describe how the diary itself was a tool of the Grey Lady's will, designed to ensure that her chosen families fulfilled their destinies without interference from the living world. Each prediction it contained was not a glimpse of possible futures, but a binding contract that reality was compelled to honor. The act of reading the diary activated these contracts, ensuring that anyone who discovered its contents would become entangled in the supernatural forces it unleashed. Whoever finds this diary will discover that it has already predicted their own involvement in the Grey Lady's work, the final entry concluded. Look carefully at the pages that follow this entry, and you will see your name written there, along with the date and manner of your participation in what is to come. The Grey Lady has been waiting for you just as she waited for us, and now that you have read these words, there is no escape from the role you must play. Deputy Brennan turned to the page that followed the final entry, and his blood ran cold as he saw his own name written there in Luther Whitmore's distinctive handwriting, along with a date that was only 3 days in the future. The entry that followed made his hands shake as he read a detailed description of his own death, complete with the exact location where his body would be found and the supernatural circumstances that would bring about his demise. According to the diary, Brennan would return to the Whitmore homestead on the night of November 15th, drawn by an irresistible compulsion to investigate the site where the diary had been discovered. He would find the house transformed, its empty rooms filled with the sounds of a family going about their daily routines, though no living occupants would be visible to his eyes. The voices of Luther, Agnes, and the children would call to him from different parts of the house, each one promising to show him important evidence that would solve the mystery of their deaths. Brennan would follow these voices from room to room, never quite catching sight of the speakers, but always hearing them just beyond the next doorway or around the next corner. Gradually, he would realize that the voices were leading him toward the root cellar, where a new hole had appeared in the earthen floor, a hole that descended far deeper than any basement should go, filled with the same gray light that had shone from the children's eyes. The diary described how Brennan would lean over this hole, just as young Daniel had done in the barn, and hear his own voice calling up from the depths below. But unlike Daniel, Brennan would understand what was happening to him. He would recognize that the hole led to the Grey Lady's realm, where the Whitmore family was waiting to welcome him as the newest member of their supernatural household. Deputy Brennan will die at 11:43 p.m. on November 15, 1839, the entry concluded. But death will be only the beginning of his service to the Grey Lady's work. Like the Whitmores before him, he will find that his true purpose lies not in the world of the living but in the spaces between worlds, where boundaries can be crossed and impossible things become inevitable. Brennan slammed the diary shut, his heart pounding as he tried to convince himself that what he had read was nothing more than an elaborate hoax or the product of a diseased imagination. But deep in his gut, he knew that every word was true, that the supernatural forces described in the diary's pages were already at work, shaping events to ensure that the predictions came to pass exactly as written. The deputy tried to stay away from the Whitmore homestead, but as the predicted date approached, he found himself drawn back to the abandoned property by a compulsion that grew stronger with each passing hour. He told himself he was conducting a thorough investigation, that his professional duties required him to examine every possible angle of the mysterious deaths. But truthfully, he knew he was being summoned by the same forces that had claimed the Whitmore family, pulled toward a destiny that had been written in the diary's pages long before he had discovered its existence. On the evening of November 15th, Brennan found himself standing at the threshold of the Whitmore house, unable to remember making the conscious decision to visit the property. The building looked different than it had during his previous visits, more solid somehow, as if it were becoming real again after months of existing as an empty shell. Light flickered in the windows, though he had brought no lamp with him, and there was no electricity or gas service to the remote homestead. As he pushed open the front door, Brennan heard the sounds of a family preparing for their evening meal, the clink of dishes being set on a table, the creak of chairs being moved, the murmur of conversation between parents and children. The sounds grew clearer as he stepped into the house, and he could begin to distinguish individual voices speaking words he couldn't quite make out, but which filled him with a terrible sense of anticipation. "Deputy Brennan," called Luther Whitmore's voice from somewhere in the depths of the house. "We've been waiting for you. Come join us for supper. We have so much to discuss about your new responsibilities." Brennan found his feet carrying him forward without any conscious decision on his part, following the voice through rooms that seemed to shift and change around him as he walked. The furniture was back in place, the walls were freshly painted, and family photographs lined the mantelpiece just as they would have during the Whitmore's lifetime. But everything was slightly wrong. Colors were too bright, shadows fell at impossible angles, and the faces in the photograph seemed to follow his movement with eyes that held depths no photograph should contain. "Don't be afraid," came Agnes Whitmore's voice from the kitchen. "Death is not the end, Deputy Brennan. It's simply the beginning of a much more important kind of existence. The Gray Lady has such wonderful work for you to do, such important tasks that require a man of your particular talents and experience." The voice of young Emma Whitmore drifted down from the second floor, sweet and innocent as it had been in life, but carrying undertones that made Brennan's skin crawl. "Come see my room, Deputy Brennan. I have something special to show you, something about the mines where children work forever and ever, digging up the bones of tomorrow and the dreams of yesterday." Daniel Whitmore's laughter echoed from the barn, clearly audible through the house's walls despite the distance. "The hole is still here, Deputy Brennan, but it's so much bigger now. Big enough for a grown man to fall through, big enough to take you all the way down to where we're waiting. Come and see how deep it goes. Come and hear your own voice calling from the bottom." Brennan tried to resist the voices, tried to turn around and flee from the house, but his body no longer obeyed his conscious will. Something else was controlling his movements now, guiding him through the transformed homestead, toward whatever fate awaited him in the depths below. He could feel the diary's predictions reshaping reality around him, bending the world to match the supernatural script that had been written in Luther Whitmore's hand. The deputy found himself descending into the root cellar, where a new hole had indeed appeared in the earthen floor exactly as the diary had predicted. The hole was filled with soft gray light that seemed to come from no identifiable source, and from its depths came the sound of his own voice calling his name in tones of desperate longing. As Brennan approached the edge of the hole, he could see that it descended far beyond what should have been possible given the house's location and the nature of the surrounding terrain. The walls of the shaft were lined with doors, hundreds of them, thousands, stretching down into darkness beyond the reach of the gray light. Behind each door he could hear the sounds of different families, different voices, all of them calling out in languages he didn't recognize, but somehow understood, were issuing the same invitation he had received from the Whitmores. "Welcome to the Gray Ladies collection," whispered a voice that might have belonged to Luther Whitmore, or might have been Brennan's own thoughts given sound. "Every family that serves her purposes, every bloodline that opens the pathways between worlds, every soul that reads the diaries and accepts their role in the greater work. We are all here, Deputy Brennan, waiting for you to join us in the spaces between life and death where the real work gets done." Brennan leaned forward to peer deeper into the impossible shaft, and as he did so, he felt his balance shift in ways that defied the laws of physics. The hole's gravity was stronger than the Earth's, pulling him not just downward but inward, toward a realm where different rules applied and different purposes governed existence. As he fell through the gray light toward the depths below, Brennan caught a glimpse of the truth behind the supernatural events that had claimed the Whitmore family, and now claimed him. The Gray Lady was not a single entity, but a collective consciousness made up of all the families who had served her purposes over the centuries, all the bloodlines who had been selected for their ability to cross between worlds and gather the resources she needed for her eternal work. The diaries were tools of recruitment, designed to identify individuals who possessed the necessary sensitivity to supernatural influences and the capacity for crossing dimensional boundaries. Each diary was unique, tailored to its specific reader and designed to draw them into the Gray Lady's service through predictions that became self-fulfilling prophecies. Brennan understood that his death was not an ending, but a transformation, a passage from limited human existence to a role in something far larger and more significant than anything he had previously imagined. The Gray Lady's work involved maintaining the barriers between different realms of existence, ensuring that certain boundaries remained intact while others could be crossed when necessary. The families who served her were not victims but chosen collaborators, selected for their bloodline's compatibility with interdimensional travel and their ability to function in spaces where normal human consciousness would be unable to survive. The terror they experienced during their transformation was not suffering, but a necessary process of preparation for their new existence. As Brennan descended through the shaft, he passed door after door behind which he could hear the voices of families who had served the Gray Lady's purposes throughout history. Each family had their own story, their own diary, their own predictions that had guided them toward their ultimate destiny. The Whitmores were simply the most recent addition to a collection that stretched back through centuries and across continents. The deputy's last conscious thought before reaching the bottom of the shaft was a recognition that somewhere in the world above, another diary was already being written, already predicting the death of its next reader, already preparing to claim another family for the Gray Lady's eternal work. The cycle would continue as it always had, drawing new participants into a supernatural network that existed to maintain the delicate balance between different realms of existence. Deputy Brennan's body was found 3 days later at the Whitmore homestead, seated peacefully in the root cellar with the diary open in his lap. The cause of death was listed as heart failure, though the expression on his face suggested he had seen something that filled him with wonder rather than fear. The diary was confiscated as evidence, but it disappeared from the county records office before it could be properly cataloged or studied. Local authorities concluded that Brennan had been overcome by the psychological strain of investigating the Whitmore deaths, though they could not explain how he had gained access to the sealed property or why he had been found in the root cellar rather than in the main house. The case was quietly closed, and the Whitmore homestead was demolished to prevent further incidents. But those familiar with the area's history knew that demolishing the house would not end the supernatural activity associated with the property. The Gray Lady's work continued regardless of what structures existed on the surface, and the diaries she created would find their way to new readers when the time was right for expansion of her interdimensional network. Years later, residents of the surrounding townships would occasionally report finding old journals and diaries in unexpected places, hidden in walls, buried in gardens, tucked into the rafters of abandoned buildings. These books always seemed to know things they shouldn't, always contained predictions that came true with disturbing accuracy, and always seemed to call out to certain individuals with promises of forbidden knowledge and terrible truths. The pattern established by the Whitmore diary continued to repeat itself throughout the region, claiming new families and expanding the Gray Lady's collection one household at a time. Each diary was unique, each family's experience was different, but the underlying purpose remained constant: to identify and recruit individuals capable of serving as bridges between different realms of existence. Some say that if you know where to look and what signs to watch for, you can still find these diaries scattered throughout the countryside, waiting for their next readers to discover them and accept the roles that have already been written for them in the Gray Lady's eternal script. They appear to be ordinary books, unremarkable journals, or personal records that seem harmless enough until you begin reading and discover that they already know your name, already know your future, and already know exactly when and how you will die. The question is not whether you will find one of these diaries, but whether you will have the strength to close it before reading the entry that bears your name and describes the supernatural destiny that awaits anyone foolish enough to believe that some books are better left unopened. If this chilling tale of a diary that predicted its own owner's death sent shivers down your spine, hit that like button and subscribe for more spine-tingling historical mysteries.